Good afternoon. How are you? Well, it's nice out. The Thomas Jefferson says our temperature is 69 degrees. The humidity is 61. Doesn't look like rain, but there you have it. And the wind is at 5.7 miles an hour. Breezy. That's what the weather stations say. They say it even if it's 1 mile an hour. It's breezy. What are the challenges facing us? Well, they are somewhat abundant. But let's consider, after our First Amendment guarantee to speak freely is our ever-extending right since the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution for self-governance. That is, our right to vote. Now, at the beginning of the country, particularly the Federalists, were untrusting of the common people, Jefferson's farmers, and even those industrial businessmen in the North. The nation therefore watched as increasingly people had a vote in filling different positions. And this has been extended over time. So at the beginning, women had no vote, slaves had no vote, indentured servants had no votes. If you weren't property, you had no vote. Anyhow, you get the idea. Now, a significant chapter in the progress we made for self-governance was the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So from 1965 until now, there has been an act that guarantees what I would call equal justice before law, meaning compensating for the exclusion of persons of color, black, from the ability to vote with various laws and devices to limit the access of a person of color to participate in our democracy or republic, depending upon your preference. It's a republic, but with elected persons who represent us. Trump and his associates have made it very clear that they oppose DEI. Now, it doesn't mean Dei of God, although that is a little kind of sweet irony that they don't recognize the God-given right. In fact, they seek to do the opposite, to exclude what is DEI, wherever they can find it. And what is that? Diversity. All men and women are equal. Equity, equal justice for all. And inclusion. We don't keep you outside. You get a chance to participate. You're involved. So, when you oppose these characteristics, you are insisting on people of diverse backgrounds be treated equally and included. So if you are opposed to DEI, you're insisting on discrimination. What else could it be? You say, no, we can't have diversity in the school, in the workplace, in the church. We can't have equity. You can't be equal. We can't have anything that provides that you're equal. We can't include you either because you're non-white. So, are they saying it that way? No, not exactly. What they say, they just go to the hunt and they say, well, I don't think we should consider race when we're considering whether or not a person gets to argue that blacks are entitled to participate in an election in a way that compensates for the fact, for all those years, when they were discriminated against. And, talking about equal rights and so forth, thinking about the 1954 case Brown against Board of Education, one of the failings of that decision wasn't that to decry separate is not equal, But it was to say that the equality that would come from that decision would be done with all deliberate speed. 54 to 65. I don't know. How fast do you think that is? So, counsel for Louisiana and for Trump in the Supreme Court argued this morning that charging race is too large an aspect of the Voting Rights Act. They're focusing on the second paragraph. So, what does that mean? When the administration is not detaining persons based on how they look, Hispanic, Mexican, certain jobs and so forth, rather than, like evidence, Trump and company seek to diminish the participation of blacks in self-government. We don't want you to have a vote, says Trump and others. We don't want you to even consider whether we're compensating for all those years of discrimination against persons of color. Now, so we have persons who are being attacked because they're Hispanic, and this includes people who are rightly here, by the way, because there is no investigation, no more than there is on who's on these ships that Trump is blowing up near Venezuela. This is like a gang leader who does what he does until he gets stopped. And I'm talking about stopping him lawfully, but he is the tutti capo with a really sorrowful agenda of who he's for and who he's against. Now, those who may take comfort in the fact that they're white and male, watch out. They'll be drawing lines to deal with those people too. And this Supreme Court might approve it. Right now we have the autocratic six on the Supreme Court, and don't think that they're not going to get their way when they don't think that persons of color should be considered when considering voting. Now, the 1965 Civil Rights Act has enjoyed various seasons of acceptance and challenge, but never has it had a challenge, I think, like the one presently presented in the Supreme Court in the argument today. 6 of those judges were saying, well, I think enough time has passed. Really? Have you looked around the country? Have you looked at the statistics? Do you think it's passed? Do you think with this administration doing what it's done, that it's passed? No way. We take some comfort that Virginia, as a state, has its own Voting Rights Act for now. But we have to be concerned about how we preserve our right to speak under siege for this Saturday, when we're going to have rallies across the country, basically saying no kings, meaning no person above the law. And we're also going to be saying, you may not dilute our representation in the government. Even as you muzzle us, you may not stop us at the voting booth and prevent us from voting. There's a chart that shows what the difference would mean to how many possible elected officials who are persons of color might be excluded if the Voting Rights Act is reduced to an empty suit. Now, I point this out not because I think it's hopeless, but because I think if we discuss these things truthfully, and people have an idea what they're going to lose if they think what was said in the election has any correspondence to the regime that's taken office and taken liberties with our rights, our security, our safety, our ability to participate in the government, and to have a fair reckoning for those who are violating all the basic principles that we've described that have been the promise to the world as we ever amended from the Declaration of Independence to the Constitution to the various amendments and the statutes that followed. All of this is a work of art and democracy and good feeling and a pattern that I believe legitimately is for the world to follow. You hear some people talk about, process is wrong. Most people, they understand it on some level, but I don't think that word helps. What it is I write a bunch of rules, and those rules predict an outcome, maybe only one outcome. So I draw districts in such a way that, for example, blacks are spread through several districts and therefore cannot achieve enough of a fraction to be represented in the election of whatever congressman is chosen. That's not equal before the law. That's not participating in our nation. And so we have to realize that what's at risk here is the ability for us to be the stewards of our own liberty, of our own freedoms. And that requires, and we've seen some of it, we saw former President Obama talking, kind of his chats. I'm not being critical. I think they're very effective. And I'm glad to see he's joined the fray because he's been edging toward it, probably finding his voice. And what I've heard so far, I like. And one of the things he says that others are repeating is get off your ass and fight because this is for real. And it's going to involve some sacrifice. And you're going to have to make some sacrifice if we're going to save this republic, if you're going to have a vote, if there's going to be equal justice before law. So if you can, think about attending Saturday's No King rally wherever you are. Now, I was stopped earlier today. I had a case in court, and afterwards I ran into a person, and she was very grateful for all the people who were speaking out. And she said she'd like to be there Saturday, but she can't. She has someone she has to take care of, and they couldn't go with her to the rally. A person like that can't go. You do what you can do. If you can't go, you don't go. If you can send $10 to help ACLU fight for a cause you care about, do that. If you can write a note or make a phone call to an elected representative, do that. But do not compound how upsetting it is to listen to the daily news with a concern about you're not doing enough. Whatever you're doing is enough. It is what you can do, and you have to take care of yourself because none of us are any good for each other. If the dramatic assault on our senses by the things we have taken sometimes for granted as our liberties are under siege, and that's no small thing. And Trump is trying to drive us crazy so that he will provoke an incident by the goons he's placed in cities around America, hoping that he can react to one violently and then claim martial law, and that'll affect elections and everything else. If you don't think that's where it's going, then you're missing what's going on. And I know from our exchanges afterwards and comments and so forth, we know what's going on. We've got to convince other people this is what's going on. When somebody blunts the message and doesn't let people understand the full gravity of what's going on, we compromise our ability to fight the scandal, the shame and the disgrace by this regime, Trump, and all the people that support him in his efforts. So that's what I got to say for today. Nice talking to you. I'll try to talk to you tomorrow too. Bye-bye.